Shalom, everyone, and once again, welcome to the third and final part of this study of Genesis chapter 25. In the last part, we learned a lot, and for many, it was a challenging and even confronting study since many myths were shattered regarding acceptance or being more tolerant. In fact, there were some who commented that we are like primitives and continue to claim that God is love and that all of us, absolutely everyone, are his children. And the truth is that we never talked about that point, so I don't understand how some people come to that conclusion. I just think it's because they don't follow the complete study. They only look at the title. And from there, they already start writing comments. This is simply an example of something that happens very often, even with many who start reading the Bible and then turn to other things. Why? Because they say the Bible is old and it's no longer that relevant. Let's remember that the Bible is just as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. But anyway, whoever wants to move forward, go ahead, and we will be here standing firm to help all those who want it. So without further ado, let's get into the last part of this chapter. Last time, if you remember, and if not, I advise you to go watch the video from the previous class. And if you're here for the first time, I encourage you to take your time and also go slowly, studying everything we've covered up to this point, up to where you are in this chapter. Last time we said that Rebekah, Isaac's wife, was worried because there was violent turmoil in her womb. What was happening there was not normal. Even though it might be normal to be nervous, since these would be her first children and maybe it made her anxious. No doubt, she had probably witnessed hundreds of pregnancies and maybe had also assisted in many births, which was giving her an indication that something was not quite right with her pregnancy. So that's how she seeks God. To find comfort and calm her fears, God gives her his answer and tells her that two nations live within her and that what she feels is a struggle for dominance. And he even tells Rebekah the following, that the firstborn will not be given the rights or the honor of being. Firstborn in Hebrew, to say firstborn, the best term used is. The custom at that time was that the firstborn, he was the heir, but here God changes the order and says that it will be the second to be born who will be the heir. Sorry, in other words, he says that the second is the first, and here we can see a recurring theme in the Bible. To separate what seems to be from a physical, earthly sense from what really is from a spiritual, heavenly point of view. From a physical point of view, it seemed to Abraham that Ishmael, the son of his concubine Hagar, was his firstborn. In other words, he thought Ishmael was the son of the promise, but from a spiritual point of view, it was Isaac who would be born miraculously from Sarah and who would have the rights of the firstborn and would be the very important son of the promise, even though he arrived later. Here, in Genesis 25, something quite similar happens. How about we read and recall a bit of this third part of Genesis? Let's read from verse 19 to verse 34, and it goes like this. These are the descendants of Isaac, son of Abraham. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, daughter of Bethuel the Aramean, from Padan Aram, sister of Laban the Aramean, as his wife. He prayed. Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and he answered him, the Lord. And Rebekah, his wife, conceived, and the children struggled together within her, and she said, if it is so, why am I like this? And she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord answered her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples shall be separated from your womb. And one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the older shall serve the younger. When her days to give birth were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. And the first came out red, and he was all hairy like a fur coat. And they called his name Esau. Afterward his brother came out. His hand was holding Esau's heel, and he was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when she gave birth to them. Esau sells his birthright. That's what they remind us of here, right? And it says in verse 27, and the boys grew, and Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the field. But Jacob was a quiet man who dwelled in tents. And Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. She loved Jacob, pay attention to that. And Jacob cooked a stew, and when Esau came in from the field, tired, he said to Jacob, I beg you, let me eat some of that red stew. For I am very tired. Therefore his name was called Edom. And Jacob answered, sell me your birthright today. Then Esau said, behold, I am about to die. So what good is the birthright to me? And Jacob said, swear to me today. And he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and got up and left. Thus Esau despised his birthright. Rebekah, Rivkah in the Hebrew language, is pregnant with twins, and I want to make something very clear, and maybe it sounds repetitive, but let us remember that the law states that the firstborn is the one who is born first. And the second one to be born is, so to speak, subordinate to the first. The fact that the firstborn was a twin even didn't change anything at all. That is, the inheritance was not divided, nor does each one receive a part of the birthright. Only one will be the firstborn, and the other one does not. Even though they shared the womb at the same time, there should always be a firstborn. And it was there, inside Rebekah's womb, that a violent struggle was taking place that foreshadowed the coming battle over which son would dominate the other. What's more, we can already see before they were born what God had predetermined, and neither Isaac nor Rebekah would take part in the decision. In fact, in verse 23, Rebekah is told. In other words, she is being told that the physical firstborn will not receive the usual rights of the best firstborn. And that instead, that right will be given to the second. This should be very clear to us. Because the eternal importance of this matter lies in the fact that the physical firstborn Esau will not be the heir to the promises of the covenant, but instead it will be the second physical son Jacob who will be the heir. Jacob would then be the firstborn, but on a spiritual level. That is, he becomes the firstborn according to the divine declaration. Now then, notice a very interesting detail. Isaac's physical firstborn, who is Esau, is a parallel to Ishmael, Abraham's physical firstborn. And Isaac's spiritual firstborn, who is Jacob, is parallel to Isaac, Abraham's spiritual firstborn and future bearer of the promises. Firstborn. So here we have this principle and a continuous pattern of reality, of duality. Everything has a spiritual reality and a physical reality that coexist simultaneously. But there is also something certain. These two separate nations, Jacob and Esau, would become enemies. And this is what shows us the meaning of the phrase, the older will serve the younger. Moving forward in the story, we come to the birth, and as we know, the first to be born was Esau. We are told that he was fair and very hairy, like a sheepskin. That is to say, practically a ball of hair. It says they called him Esau. It also tells us that during the birth, Jacob was holding Esau's heel. which suggests to us that the idea is that Jacob was trying to prevent Esau from being born first. Now, to better understand what follows, we need to realize that Rebekah would not have kept to herself the information that God had given her about the destiny of her twin sons. That would have been disloyal and even disrespectful to her husband. Rather, it seems that what happened is that she did tell him right away what God had revealed to her. That the first of the twins to be born would not be declared the firstborn, but rather the second to be born would be. He would be the firstborn, according to the instruction that God had determined at that time. We must remember that in a family of that time, what mattered most was that there be a successor from the father's line to inherit the clan's authority. And that successor always had to be the firstborn. What's more, it's very likely that Rebekah even informed her twin sons that she gathered Esau and Jacob. And she may have told them about God's decision that Jacob and not Esau would be the firstborn, that Jacob would be the one. Now, let's just think about it. As parents, it would be very, 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 very cruel to wait until both of them are grown up to give them such a decisive piece of news. Besides, considering that it was a decree that both the mother and the father were already aware of, because the mother had been warned even before the children were born, but...
Así que es muy probable
that the whole family was aware that the younger Jacob was the one destined to have the birthright over the older Esau. As the story goes on and the children grow up, we see that Esau was skilled with the bow, probably quite strong, and that he liked a rather wild life. For his part, we are told that Jacob was calmer and more introspective. Someone rather sensitive and less inclined to that kind of adventurous wild life, we might say. Here, a kind of pattern appears again. Because if we think about it, parents generally tend to like having brave sons, especially fathers, while mothers prefer to have relaxed, calm sons. And this story of Esau and Jacob gives us a kind of parallel with Ishmael, who was Abraham's favorite and was more of a hunter, and Isaac, who was his mother's favorite. When the Lord told Abraham, he told Abraham that it would be the second son, Isaac, who would receive the position of firstborn. At that time, the one who held that position was Ishmael. Abraham cried out to God and said, "Oh Lord, if only you could let Ishmael live in your presence." Abraham had decided that he wanted Ishmael as his firstborn, and Isaac had decided that he wanted Esau as his firstborn, and neither of the two fathers would get what they wanted in the natural. Later in our story, we see that there comes a day when Esau is returning from hunting, hungry, and he sees that Jacob had prepared a pot of lentils. Literally translated, a red stew. Jacob then suggests that Esau openly and definitively sell his birthright. The impulsive Esau responds to Jacob's answer with a statement that begins with, "I'm about to die." And the truth is that by that logic, he could just give his birthright to Jacob right then, and so he seals the deal with an oath. The phrase, "I'm about to die," isn't literal, it's an expression, something like, "Who cares?" Or like when someone says nowadays, "No way, I'm dying." It's not that they're actually dying, I hope I'm being clear.
There.
In any case, God had already resolved the matter a long time ago, and actually Esau had no birthright to sell, because by divine determination it already belonged to Jacob. And Jacob didn't need to resort to betrayal or any kind of deception to get it, because the Lord had already assigned it to him. However, neither Jacob nor Esau had enough faith to accept it as a fact. And here too, there's a very important detail that will be very useful to us in the following chapters. Esau is given a nickname, Edom. Edom means red. Remember, there is a moment when the Ark of the Covenant stays in someone's house, and we are told that this person was blessed during the time the Ark was there. We are told that his name was Obed-Edom. Obed in Hebrew means worker or servant, and Edom means red or ruddy. In other words, the ark was in the house of the worker, the employee, the ruddy servant. That ruddy one, in other words, here in our story from Genesis, Esau comes to receive this nickname Edom. And it not only refers to his reddish physical features, but also to this incident with the pot, the case of the red stew. So for future reference, remember, Edom and Esau are exactly the same. That is, they are one and the same. Therefore, the future nation of Edom, which will appear so often from this point on in the Bible as a constant enemy of Israel, will also have a role in the end times. And know that the people of Edom, the Edomites, are simply the descendants of Esau. At the end of verse 34, we are told the following. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank, got up, and left. And so Esau despised his birthright. In other words, that day Esau despised his birthright, and without a doubt, it was a very, very severe biblical judgment. As we can assume, Rebekah told Jacob, and also without a doubt Esau, that despite the chronological order of birth, it would be Jacob who should have the birthright. This must have been, without a doubt, something very sad and very painful for Esau. Let's think about it. His own mother is telling the firstborn that he was not going to be recognized as such. Can you imagine how he must have felt? Without a doubt, he must have thought many times that his mother was on Jacob's side and that she probably preferred him much more. Also, let's remember that Jacob's personality was more in line with what a mother usually values. He was calmer, probably closer. Jacob spent much more time with his mother than Esau did. Maybe Esau himself also chose that wilder lifestyle because it was easier for him to be away from home and family. To avoid the discomfort of knowing that even though he was the oldest, he wasn't the firstborn. Therefore, we can conclude that there's no doubt this must have marked a large part of Esau's life. And it's likely that this led him to become someone bitter, distrustful, and even at some point, even cynical. We could also think in material terms, and let's remember that Isaac was not someone who lived in poverty, but quite the opposite. And all of that would go directly to the firstborn. In this case, Esau would not have access to any of that. That's why thinking that he wasn't interested in the rights and benefits of the birthright doesn't make much sense. He was going to receive a lot of wealth, but rather he probably saw the loss of all these rights as something inevitable, even though it was deeply unfair, and that's why he decided to act as if he didn't care. In other words, what he's doing is rejecting it before it could be publicly and officially taken away from him. This must have been like swallowing a bitter injustice. Accepting something he couldn't change, even though it seemed completely unfair to him. How many times have some of you been in a situation like that, feeling that what was happening was totally unfair? But let's remember something. God had already decided that this would be the outcome. And what sometimes seems unfair to us is, for God, part of a greater process. Because he has a plan and everything, absolutely everything, is under his control. So, if these words we're reading in the Bible bring you comfort, that's exactly what they were meant to do. Those people were people. They had feelings, desires, and needs. They had quirks, they had flaws, they had pride. They were real. When we better understand their circumstances, it's not hard to put ourselves in their shoes. Because even today, many of us can find ourselves in very, very, very similar situations. Anyway, let's move on with the study. Follow our channel for more. And for that, we're going to go back a little bit. And we're going to analyze some circumstances surrounding this event that aren't so obvious. At least, not for those who live on the other side of the Middle East, for people who live in the West. First, I'm going to touch on some topics that might be uncomfortable for some, but they're facts we need to analyze. And I ask, does anyone find it strange that it's a man? Jacob? Who is cooking in this story? Clearly, the scriptures say that Jacob prepared the stew. Now, cooking at that time was a task specifically for women. And especially when they were already settled, that is, when they were already living in villages. And I want to clarify this cultural context. That's how roles worked in the Middle East. Of course, when men were far from home, when they had to go on campaigns and be out in the field, they did cook, but that was the exception and not the rule. It was tradition. Or it would have even been shameful under normal circumstances for a young man to be the one cooking when the whole camp was already set up. So the question is, was Jacob weak? Did his mother's favoritism turn him into a mama's boy? Here's what I'm getting at. When we understand the ancient Hebrew culture, much of which, by the way, has been passed down in Jewish traditions to this day, when we come across biblical scenes, for example, like Jacob and Esau with the stew, we can recognize that something out of the ordinary is happening in this particular story. Because it was not usual for Jacob, who was probably 15 years old at that time, to be cooking. It simply was not normal. So what was happening? And the answer may lie in one of the ancient Hebrew traditions that is still part of practicing Jewish life to this day. A tradition that goes back to ancient times and is called Shiva, which is part of the mourning rites for the dead, 7 days. So what does this story about Shiva have to do with ours? The ancient Hebrew sages almost unanimously agree on the context of what happens between Esau and Jacob. Listen carefully, there has been a death in the family. The question is, who was the one who died? And the answer is Abraham. That is, the stew and lentils are known as a mourning meal. Lentil soup is a traditional food that was eaten during the 7 days of mourning, which is referred to as Shiva. I'm going to explain it a little more in detail in a moment, but think about this. What is the point of the scripture insisting here that it's a red stew and then identifying it as lentil stew? Let's remember, verse 34 adds this to the context and the meaning. So what difference does it make that the soup is made of lentils? Any good Jew knows that this indicates a period of mourning. But there is more evidence that immediate family members should not cook during the 7 days. Other relatives or friends are the ones who should provide the food for that period. Or pre-cooked foods can be consumed, prepared before the family member's death. It's important to define who makes up the immediate family. And these are the mother, the brothers, the children, and the wife are considered members of the immediate family. The grandchildren.
No lo son.
They are not considered members of the immediate family for the purposes of this part of the mourning rites. Rebekah, who normally cooked for the family, had been unable to do so. That is, she couldn't cook. And Jacob, who was Abraham's grandson, was allowed to cook, since he was outside the immediate family circle. So maybe that's why he was the one preparing the food. For the morning, this lentil stew. In fact, we also found that even eggs are considered an appropriate food for morning. What these two foods, lentils and eggs, have in common is that they are circular, they are round, or at least almost round. And the round shape generally illustrates the circular nature of life, the cycle of being conceived from nothing and returning to nothing, physically speaking, of course. It also speaks of a generation that disappears, and another that begins in an endless cycle. It's the Bible, and naturally the Hebrew thought that emanates from it. The one that shows us that history is circular, that it repeats itself over and over again, and with the same patterns that God ordered and established and wove into this entire fabric of the universe. And naturally, it's secular humanism and its proud offspring, evolutionism, or however you say it, Darwinian, the one that claims no. History is a straight line. It begins at an unknown point in the past and moves randomly toward an inconceivable future. Each moment is new, and there is nothing in the past to compare it to. There are no patterns. Morality evolves. The old becomes obsolete, and the new becomes preeminent. The old is replaced by something that destroys the previous pattern and establishes a new one. The illustration of the lentil and the egg tells us the complete opposite. Human beings need physical examples of God's spiritual principles. When we set them aside or believe that we no longer need them, the result is deception and error. Miriam? When we talk about the rights of the firstborn, which include receiving a double portion of the family wealth and the right to rule the clan, it's easy to forget the responsibilities that come with those rights. Any sensible parent knows what I'm talking about. Any executive, manager, or leader knows what I'm talking about. Yes, the position comes with rewards and honors, but it also comes with duties that must be properly fulfilled. Furthermore, all of this outweighs any personal benefit or reward. Esau knew his grandfather Abraham very well and was equally aware of the great and serious burden he carried. Of course, he also knew his father Isaac well and the tremendous responsibility that God's covenants involved. Esau probably didn't want anything to do with that. No doubt, like many teenagers, he wanted to enjoy everything, to give orders, but without anyone telling him what to do. He loved the idea of being at the head of the table, being rich, and so on. But he didn't want the responsibilities he was being given, nor the rights or duties that came with it. Esau, surely after reflecting on his grandfather's death, had decided that he didn't want to be tied down by all the duties of the firstborn and become the patriarch of the family when his father Isaac died. He just wanted to enjoy life as much as he could, that is, to make the most of it. Jacob chose that precise moment to challenge Esau because no one knows another person better, perhaps, than a twin knows his twin. Jacob knew that Esau was willing to give up his birthright and all the heavy obligations that came with it. The death of his grandfather and the reflection we usually have about our lives when someone close to us dies pushed him to the limit. The divinely ordained duties that Isaac and Abraham surely had, Esau and his two brothers, the same Esau, home. Those were not things Esau wanted. The importance of continuing with the promise of the covenant was so great that nothing could come before it. And this is where we understand that Esau was not the one chosen to continue with the calling. In verse 27, much is revealed to us about the character of each young man. We are told that Esau became a hunter while Jacob was a quiet man who lived in tents. I'm not going to dwell on this, but keep in mind that only on 2 occasions in the scriptures is a man called a hunter. The first to be described as a hunter was Nimrod, and the other was Esau. As the Bible uses it, the term hunter is negative. He is a man who kills animals for pleasure and has little or no conscience when killing a man. On the other hand, Jacob is called a quiet man. In some Bibles, the translation says simple man. In others, peaceful man. And in others, the word that can be used. Now, in the Hebrew language, it is said tam. Although peaceful or simple are not necessarily incorrect, they do not fully capture the essence of the word. Yaakov and Esau are contrasted, that is, they are opposed. Tam means blameless or without guilt. With the idea of someone upright before God, it's another way of saying righteous. The contrast here lies between the one who loves to kill and the one who loves life, the one who wanders aimlessly and the one who stays close, the one who sacrifices the flock and the one who shepherds it. The last verse absolutely sums up this entire episode. And it doesn't need any kind of commentary. It goes like this, verse 34. Then Yaakov gave Esau some bread and lentil stew, and he ate and drank and got up and left. And in this way, Esau despised his birthright. This is where we come to the end of chapter 25. Later on, we will move on to chapter 26. And the story between Jacob and Esau isn't over. The story of Jacob and Esau will come up again later. They will meet again at a certain point. But it won't be exactly in chapter 26. Up to this point, I think we've learned quite a bit. We've gone through chapter 25 in 3 sections. And I think we've definitely gone deep. I also want to encourage everyone who doesn't know that we have an online academy called thelandacademia.com. There you can find more exclusive material. Material that's not on YouTube. In fact, it can't be put on YouTube. Because there we cover very specific topics, really key ones. So I encourage you, if you can, to go to the academy. You register, you subscribe, you pay a small monthly fee, and from there, you can study whenever you want, at whatever time you want, because all the material is already online, so you manage your time however you want to manage it. So I encourage and advise all of you who want to go a little deeper into the scriptures, to get to know God's heart and His character a little more. I encourage you to go and study that material. I believe it will undoubtedly be a blessing to you, because we have testimonies from many people who have been blessed. This is where I leave you. It's always a privilege for me. And as always, it has been a pleasure to share with you what we have received by grace. By grace we give it. And I hope I have been able to help you. And try not to make biblical language difficult. Rather, the scriptures are there so that we can understand them. They are letters that God gave us so that we can benefit from them. I hope you enjoyed this study. And we'll meet again next week. And we'll be entering chapter 26 of this fantastic book of Genesis. Allow me to close with the priestly blessing in Hebrew. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up His countenance upon you and give you peace. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you. May he have mercy on you and grant you peace. God bless you. Shalom, and have a good rest of your day. Share this material if it has also been a blessing to you, so that we can be a blessing to others. Shalom, blessings from Israel. Bye.